Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Honestly Let's Talk. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, and every week I love to have a variety of conversations with some of my favorite people on the planet. I have so loved these talks, and I have really been looking forward to this week's conversation over the power of therapy. And when I thought about having this, the first name that came to my mind, because, selfishly, I'm always thinking like, who can I hang out with during this 20 to 40 minutes? And I was like, I know somebody I want to hang out with who will also share real talk and her journey. And that is my friend Johora. Johora, thank you so much. Tell everybody who you are if they don't already know.
Hey, also, I am Johora Warren. People call me Sojo. That name came from our time in quarantine, and we were all on Instagram all the time. So I'm Sojo. I am an educator. I am a mom. I am a grad student, and I am a passionate activist. I always say all of those different roles because they all mean so much to me, and they're all just different parts of my identity. So I am a mom of two. I have two babies that I actually had to like, I had to lock myself in this room and barricade it because kids will find a way to come inside. So I have a 5-year-old and I have a 3-year-old,
Oh.
which Todd, that's about to be you. That's about to be your life.
But not a 5 and a 3-year-old. They're going to be the same
No.
age.
Yes, they are. Double trouble. It's going to be so great.
That's right.
And I have been an educator for the past 7 years. So I taught third grade for 4 years, and this is year number 3 in fifth grade. So upper elementary is my jam, but more so just teaching students just the truth and teaching them just how to be good human beings. So
Well, I have really been looking forward to this conversation today because, I feel like mental health still has that stigma attached, but I feel like we're finally starting to break through some walls where the conversations I see happening more and more often. But one of the things is that I'm seeing quite often is that we are willing to talk about mental health more, but we're not willing to talk about therapy more. I feel like we don't dive enough into that. And I know, one of our good friends, both of us, is a guy named Daniel Patterson, and he is the one that really destroyed any excuse I had for me personally about attending therapy with some of the things he said. I was like, God, you just present it in a way where there's literally no way that I could make an
yes,
excuse why not to go. But
exactly.
I'd love to start with you and your journey and kind of when did you decide that, okay, I'm going to give this therapy thing a shot?
So for me, the barrier from starting therapy was one, stigma. So that was always scary to me. Like, oh, like in my community, it was always you just pray about it, you don't talk about it. So I kind of had to like quietly seek help. But another barrier was access to it. So in
Mm,
my mind, I'm like, oh, therapists are always like old white people that aren't going to be able to connect with me or relate to me. They're not going to get my story. And also I'm like, well, therapy's expensive. I'm not going to
yeah,
be able to afford it.
yeah,
It's a luxury that I can't afford. So that was a barrier for me to access therapy. And then it just got to the point where I just hit rock bottom. And
yeah,
I was luckily I was able to start medication because it's like I don't feel good. I need to feel better right now. So my
mhm,
doctor prescribed me some medication, but it still felt like okay, that took away the sadness, but it didn't take away all these conflicting thoughts. And I'm like,
yeah,
I need to talk to somebody because medication doesn't like take that away. It just
mhm,
kind of like mellows you out, and it takes away some of the feelings, but it doesn't take away some of the thoughts. So I looked through my actually we had like at the beginning of the year when you have to sit through teacher planning and they have all these presentations that you kind of like are just like I'm thinking
uh-huh,
about how I could be in my room. We actually had someone from district come and he was talking about how our job as educators are very stressful, and our district provides 5 free sessions for called an employee assistance program. So 5 free sessions with a
wow,
therapist. And I was like, okay, like so that takes away the money barrier.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, hopefully I can find somebody who is not going to be this old white person that doesn't understand me. And I was able to find, out of the, I think there were like 6 or 7 therapists in my area, and one of them was a black lady. I was like, please work, please work, please work. And she did, and she's my therapist. I love Delilah.
And one thing I want to ask about that, because, that was one thing I remember hearing Daniel share, is that I always had the fear that I would go see a therapist and hate them, but feel obligated to stay with them because I'd done the first thing. And I remember him saying, no, it's like anything else. You got to shop for one that works for you.
Yes,
You're there for you, not to please them. And so if that
yes.
therapist isn't working for you, go see someone else. And so, did I hear you correctly that your first one you found was a good fit, so you didn't have to worry about finding others?
So actually, I did attempt therapy when I was in college. Like, went to the counseling center, and I was like, okay, let me try this out. And I just felt like when I was talking to the lady, she just minimized a lot of my concerns. Like, oh,
Mhm.
everybody feels that way. Oh, well, not everybody, and I'm talking about what I'm going through right now.
Right.
So it wasn't helpful. So that turned me off of therapy for
Mhm.
several years. And then I realized, like, no, it is. It's like shopping, it's like dating. You have to find
Mhm.
the right fit, and you're not going to be for everybody, and everybody's not going to be for you. So I encourage people to understand that, you know, this is again, this is for you. This is to help you, and
Mhm.
you need to be honest with yourself about if it's not a right fit. So just
Right.
like if we are at a school that is not a right fit, the admin, you just don't mesh with them, you go somewhere else and you try and see if it's a better fit. So it's the same
Right.
thing with therapy.
Well, I've watched some of your journey through social media, but I know many of the listeners may not have. And so, I'd love to kind of just dive into the process of, you get over those excuses and that fear of not having money and not finding someone. You find another woman of color that you're excited to go and meet with. And so, once that first meeting is over, do you see all of your anxiety about it dissipate? And it's just such a euphoric feeling and you're ready to go back for the second session? Or did you find yourself having to work up to the second session too?
So I feel like, okay, so for me, once I got through that first session, because I don't know about a lot of people kind of have anxiety about going to therapy, and therapy is
Right.
supposed to help the anxiety. So it's kind of like that buildup of, oh, what if I don't like them? What if they don't like me? What do we talk about? That was my whole thing. I don't know what to say. There's all these things. I don't know what to say. So afterwards, it was so nice because I felt relief, and I felt like, oh, I can go throughout my day with using the tips that Delilah talked to me about. So
Yeah.
it was, I talked to her about this pressing concern in my life, and then she was like, "Well, why don't you think about it this way?" It's like, "Girl, you are right. Why don't I think about it like that?"
You're
So
like, take
actually,
my
it's so
money, take my money.
yes, yes. Like, you go to therapy so they can snatch your edges, so they can tell you about yourself, and then you feel lighter because you were able to have that conversation with someone. Of
Yeah.
sometimes you just need to talk to somebody who's not there to judge you, someone who's going to tell you like how it is, someone who's going to help you sort things out.
Mhm.
So she always, like, she just drops a bunch of gems that I like write down, and then I'm able to like continue to reflect on it. I look back at it and I'm like, oh, so anytime I'm feeling kind of like I'm feeling kind of like anxious, I either set up a new session or I review notes from my previous session.
Right.
So I will say, ever since I started going to therapy again, like regularly, it's like been a weight lifted off, and it is
Right.
like a nice feeling. Like, is all of my anxiety gone? No, that's
Of
part
course
of
not.
who I am, right? But it's definitely just like, okay, I can make it through the day. I can tell myself different
Mhm.
things, and so on and so forth. So therapy just really helps with helping you sort those things out and think about things differently.
Well, I know historically in the Black community, therapy isn't often talked about or recommended. And like you alluded to earlier, a lot of the times the comments can be something as like, we'll just pray it away or we'll do this or that. And so when you decided to publicly talk about attending therapy, did you have any reservations about just putting it out there? Or are you just kind of at that point where you're like, this is me, I'm putting it out there, I don't care? Because I know you've kind of got both those going on.
I do. I have both of it. So it definitely gets easier after you kind of taken that brave first step. But for me, I I feel like the reason why I wanted to start being open about talking about it was because of how low I had gotten.
Mm,
And I was in such a terrible place, just having like ideation and thoughts of like, well, I don't belong here. I don't want to be here anymore. And I suffered in silence for nearly a year. That's a
right.
very long time to feel alone, a very long time. So it finally was like I kind of started like telling like one person, like a close friend of mine that I
Mm,
trusted. And then they were like, no, like I feel that way too. So then, started telling other people. And then, like, actually, the hardest people that it was to, come out about my therapy journey was my family, because
mm,
it's like, oh, we're strong Black women, we don't talk about that. I'm like,
right.
I my mom had, 6 kids. There were 6 of us growing up. I have 2 and I'm struggling. And I'm like, well, I can't feel bad because this lady had 6. She had 6 and she's doing just fine. But she wasn't. She was just putting on this front because in the Black community, especially Black females, you're always the strong one. You're always the
Right.
one that you're not phased by anything. You don't show weakness. You don't show sadness, and that has roots in white supremacy. So,
Mm,
for me, it was like I was like, Mom, I just feel bad. And she was like, well, I mean, you can talk to me because anything you're feeling, I've probably felt. So
right.
then I let her know, and I was like, listen, I can't do this anymore. I can't just try and pray about it. I do pray, but I need something else. I need something in addition to that.
Mhm.
And a lot of people do. So once I like kind of talked to my family about it, I drafted up a post like, I need therapy. I'm going. Hit send. But I'm like, I was kind of cautious about it. So I like ran from the phone for a little bit. So I didn't see like the notifications immediately. Cause I'm like, oh gosh, if people think about me some kind of way, at least, it's out there. And I'm
Yeah.
going to run from my phone so I don't either delete it or so I don't see like what people are saying. And sometimes it takes that brave step, and it takes that it takes an act of courage for you to share about what you're
Mhm.
struggling about. And can you still hear me okay, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sometimes it takes that brave moment and that brave, courageous step, and it's a ripple effect. Courage is contagious. So it's a ripple effect. People start sharing their journey, and they start sharing their other journey. So it's really nice. It's really nice. And I talk about it openly with my students too. And it's nice to kind of feel like you're empowering people.
Well, I remember that Instagram post very clearly because there were two thoughts that came into my head when I saw that shared. And I remember the first one being just so impressed by your bravery to put that out there and to do it so open and honestly. Oh, well, she fell out, but she's got the link, so she will jump back in here with us that are live and can see this now. Know that she will be right back. Um, but while I'm waiting for her, I will say that, oh, here she comes. And you're back. Can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
hear
I
me?
can hear you.
Okay, there we go. So I was saying, I was so impressed by seeing your Instagram post, one for your bravery and how openly and honestly you put it out there. But the other side, I felt empowered, not necessarily to put it out there on social media, but I felt empowered to say, man, I love seeing other people who can come alongside and share that piece of themselves. And I knew you were speaking to so many when you put that out there and you did finally get the bravery to go back and look at some of the comments, did you feel really validated in taking that step of bravery?
Yes, absolutely. Because there were so many people that I had heard from that were like, oh, I go to therapy too. I've gone for the past year. And I'm like, you? And then someone else would be like, yeah, I love my therapist. I look forward to going to therapy. I'm like, you too? So it was like a ripple effect. And yes, I did. I definitely felt validated. And I'm like, oh, well, now I'm just going to talk about it because there are other people. It feels like I'm alone, but
Yeah.
that's just, that's the enemy telling me that I'm alone. I'm not. And there's so many people that go to therapy. There's so many like Instagram sites now that are like, like posting little tidbits about therapy and things like that. So I love the trajectory that we're on, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more and more people continue to go.
Well, I know you mentioned that this conversation has also come up with your students. What did that look like?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I remember hearing you earlier mention that this conversation has also come up with your students. And so what did that conversation look like? She is having a little bit of Wi-Fi issues today, but we will get this worked out. As you're listening, I really want you to keep in mind that, we aren't saying that everybody has to be in therapy. The things that we're sharing today are our personal journeys and our personal stories. And it does start with you just seeking help and asking for advice. And just like I mentioned earlier, your first therapist you try out may suck. And you may be like, that was the worst. And that's when you go and find a different one. Just like if you were seeing a dentist or a general doctor or anything like that. Even if you go into a store and you walk into a store and you realize the person there's a jerk and you don't want to be back in that store, then you go and find someone else. But we're going to see it. Oh, I think she's back. Okay.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
No, we live in the age of Wi-Fi issues, so we
Yes.
all understand. But I was saying, you mentioned earlier about your students and how you brought the conversation up with them. So tell me a little bit what that looked like.
So I teach fifth grade, and a couple of things that I had heard was, some of them trying to say things like, oh, so and so's depressed or things like that. And they were using it kind of lightly. So it was in that like I had conversations with them
Right.
like, hey, do you know what that means? Like, oh, it's when you're like really sad. And I was like, yes, but it's something deeper than that. I actually suffer from depression, and it's really hard for me to work through, to live through, to live with. And so having those conversations with them, they were like, oh, okay. So I
Yeah.
know it's not something for you to just say lightly. And then we've like read stories and things like that. And they're like, oh, well, this person feels sad. Like, oh, well, it's a different kind of sad. Or this person feels scared. Oh, well, they feel anxious. Sometimes people have anxiety. So
Yeah.
we have those like open conversations, which is nice because kids don't have the words a lot of times.
Mhm.
So you'll like, they'll tell you like, oh, my stomach hurts. And it's really, no, you have anxiety, you're anxious. So just encouraging and empowering them to use the correct terminology for things. I'm a huge advocate of that, but also letting them know that other people are have different, neurological conditions that they live with, and that's okay. It's never something to make fun of, and it's also not something to be ashamed of.
Well, you mentioned earlier breaking the news to your family and talking to your mother and things like that. So now that you've been attending therapy for an amount of time, and you, I think, have attested to the fact that you feel differently, you feel like you've been given a couple tools you didn't have in your tool chest before. Has your family noticed that difference and made any kind of comments?
Yes, actually. So they're like, oh, well, you seem really calm. And it's like, no, it's not. It's just Delilah and I had a conversation today. And, I just feel like I can sort things. I feel like I can take on the world until next week when it's like,
That's
I'm
right.
on the phone again. but yes, so they've kind of asked me like, hey, so what did y'all talk about? Like, what were some things she said about this? So I've kind of like been sharing a lot of the gems that she's talked to me about with
Right.
them. And then, I've even had like my sister say, well, I think I'm going to look into finding a therapist. And so that's really nice too, just
Yeah.
being open and honest about it. Sometimes, they'll say problematic things like, oh, well, you're crazy. I'm not crazy. I have anxiety.
That's right.
I have depression. That doesn't make me crazy,
Mhm.
something I live with, and it's something I'm
Mhm.
surviving and thriving with. So
So I know when people attend therapy, everybody does it in different spurts. What does your time frame look like? Do you go every week? Is it just kind of like, it just kind of fluctuates and it goes whenever?
So hopefully the feds aren't watching, the feds meaning my district, because they only give us 5 free sessions. I'm like, listen, sometimes it takes you like 3 to really feel completely comfortable and let your guard down with your therapist.
Right.
So I decided, I was like, okay, I had tried evenings like a couple years ago with my girl Delilah, and it just didn't work. I felt like I don't really like this. So I decided, okay, I'm going to try maybe first thing in the morning,
Right.
like right before I have to, teach my students. I'm going to meet with you first. And it's been really nice. So I call it Therapy Thursdays. It's a way for me to remember that I have therapy on Thursday. So I've been meeting with her every week, but
Right.
I got to call again and be like, hey, I need another 5 sessions, please.
Yeah.
Can I do somebody else's 5 sessions? But yeah, so every week we took a little break after 3 sessions because of like the holidays and things like that. But it was nice because I felt like we had made so much progress that taking 2 weeks off, taking 3 weeks off didn't feel like as stressful
Got
as
it.
before. Yeah. So then we had our 4th session, and then there was a little bit of a break, and then meeting again. So I would say, like, when you first start, it's nice to meet with them as frequently as you can. So like a
Right.
week or so. And I actually recommend like for an hour. I think 30 minutes is a little too short.
Mhm.
Meeting with them for an hour. And then once you build that relationship with them, then you can kind of be like, okay, well, maybe I'm going to meet with you every other week, or so on and so forth. It depends on the person.
Well, and what the pandemic has really opened up is so many therapists now will do virtual meetings with you. And so many will offer free sessions for the first session, all kinds of stuff. So for those who are listening who aren't lucky enough to work in a district like yours where there are 5 free, goodness gracious, that's amazing. Just know that you can reach out, and you can reach out to your insurance providers, see what they do. You can also just reach out to people and see how they'll work with you. A lot of therapists will also work with you, but there are in person, there are virtual options. I know that even some mainstream TV shows are now tackling some of this. I think of This Is Us. Do you watch that?
Yes.
And I love seeing, like, Randall's my favorite character on the show, and watching him grow and things. But to see his journey through therapy and how it's affected him, I think was such a great example for people to see in such a mainstream way. But
And
I
as a
also
black man
remember,
too.
do what?
And as a black man, that was so important to see.
Yep, I agree. And and I think of my friend Daniel, who also said, even if you don't regularly see a therapist, you should schedule 2 sessions a year. Why? Because you get your teeth checked twice a year. We should get our heads checked twice a year too. And that has been such a thing to me. It's like, yeah, why would I take care of my teeth and not what's going on up here, especially when we're working with kids? I
Yes.
love that you have talked about it with kids. And even when you explained it, you do it in such a age appropriate way. It's not saying, oh, well, they're too young. And it's also not going, oh, I went into every detail about how I struggle. No, it's like, your students, when to have those conversations. They're not forced on them.
Right.
And so do you look at some point to be having those same conversations with your own children?
Absolutely, for sure. And I feel like I'm trying to kind of build that up now and build like an honest and loving relationship with them. So kind of empowering them to let me know how they're feeling. So, kids, it's hard for them, when they're babies, they cry. They cry about everything. They cry if they're sad, they cry if they're mad, they cry if they're hungry. So like kind of saying, like using those words like, hey, how are you feeling? Are you feeling frustrated right now?
Right.
Okay, are you feeling sad right now? And then giving them those tools. So kind of like gradually letting them know, and then asking them like, hey, what's going on? So I think you can kind of naturally kind of have those conversations with your kids. So you're not starting from scratch when things are, upsetting, when things start getting really, really hard for them. So like now they will tell me like, hey, that hurt my feelings. It's like,
Mhm.
good, because
Yeah.
I feel like so many people like in our age group need therapy because our feelings were repressed and we were never
Mhm.
allowed to talk about it. So I think that I'm starting with allowing them to tell me how they are feeling and like
Right.
organize their thoughts and their feelings that way.
Can
Yeah.
you think of, sometimes when we hear things like therapy, we have preconceived notions that when we actually go through the process, we realize how wrong we were. When you look back, is there anything that sticks out to you that you're like, oh, I totally thought this was going to be the case or this was going to happen or da-da-da, and it didn't at all?
So, okay, I literally, this is so silly. I thought that I was going to be like lounging on a chair, letting them know every single thing about my life. That's not therapy. And then I thought that it would be them like with a notebook and,
Right, right.
a pad and paper and going, so let's talk about your childhood and how that
Just like the
connects.
movies.
Yes, but it's not like that. I love like with my therapist because it's really just a conversation.
Mm,
And because I'm so much of a conversationalist, that's been helpful for me to sort out things. I process my thoughts verbally. So it's been nice, like having her kind of, to bounce off ideas about how I'm
yeah.
thinking. So I'm like, oh, well, I felt like this person was, I feel like this relationship was a little toxic. She's like,
Mhm.
absolutely, it was. Or, do you think that maybe this person is responding to you this way because they think you're judging them? I'm like, Delilah, girl, yes, you're right. So, it's been cool. Um, it's really just a conversation.
Do you find yourself running out of things to say though? I know you're a talker, but do you ever just be like, okay, Delilah, I don't have anything else. I guess we hang up now. Or I guess we say
Yes.
goodbye now.
Yes, and that's what I was so anxious about because I'm like, there's so many things. Which one do I decide to talk about? Or sometimes there's like a lull in the conversation. And I think when you have a good therapist, they kind of finesse it and they ask
Mhm.
you about like things you've talked about before. So like, hey, are there any updates? Or I know Delilah, she'll ask me like, hey, what anything big happened since we spoke last? So
Mhm.
then I like, sift through my brain. And even though it wasn't something like huge, we end up having like a good conversation about it and breaking it down. So I think a good therapist will kind of like start asking you questions. They'll let you talk. And then if they notice like you're kind of like, oh, well, I don't have anything else, they'll start to ask you questions.
So, today's conversation is about the power of therapy, and you've shared a lot of your journey and a lot of great ideas, people to take and think about their own experiences. So, as we close this out, I'm wondering for the people who are listening today, if you want them to walk away with just one thing, or you hope they really heard you say something, or you really want them to understand something about therapy, what would you leave with them as your one thing?
Oh, my one thing, Todd.
Well, you can have more than one. You're Johora.
Okay. So I would say make the call, even if you think everything is perfectly okay in your life. Therapy just kind of helps you sort things out and think things through. Especially if you're an educator, we have a lot of things that we kind of naturally repress. And I think even as adults, we just naturally have learned to kind of keep going and
Right.
work through it. But it's nice to have somebody else that you can kind of lean on to bounce ideas off of that isn't like your, that's a neutral party. So
Yeah.
I love that. Had to tell my child to stop. And so I would say make the call. Go ahead, make the call. If you are like me, you're a person of color and you're worried about finding someone that that might not relate to you, there are websites that you can go to like Black Girls Therapy and things like that where you can find therapists like organized by their ethnicity. So
Oh,
that
wow.
can kind of take away, that can take away one of the barriers that you
Yeah.
might have. And then also understanding that a lot of therapists will work with you, like look at your insurance and look at your look at the plans that they have to work with you, because a lot of therapists work on sliding scales. And overall, just understand that therapy needs to be a priority. You go to the doctor when you're feeling sick, when you have a broken bone, when you have, some type of pain. But we all need therapy as a way to just check ourselves and to make sure that we're good.
Well, Johora, I have been so thankful that you joined me today for this conversation. I appreciate you so much, and I know this is going to impact some lives. And so thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for joining another Honestly Let's Talk. Check us out live every single Thursday at 8 p.m., and you can see all the past conversations on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube.